Hey guys, it's Godbars here, the self-proclaimed hip-hop historian, and this is the 39th episode of my series where I grab a vinyl from my collection, talk about why I love it, what influence it had, and what its place is in the grand scheme of hip-hop. While in the 90s New York rap scene, the only album that could really stand next to Illmatic was Ready to Die. Adversely, in California, the only album that could match the unreachable impact and influence of All Eyes on Me was Dr. Dre's The Chronic. I want to emphasize that these are by no means the only perfect albums each coast has to offer. They aren't even near the only game changing and revolutionary ones. All I'm saying is these albums changed the landscape of the culture so drastically, either sonically or lyrically, that they almost exist on a tier all of their own. But in no way does that imply you should take anything away from the rest of the albums I put in this group, because the only reason I had to expand the amount from 10 to 20 is every one falls under the category of essential hip hop listening, in my opinion. Albums like Enter the 36 Chambers or Low End Theory are both insanely well regarded albums that were impactful, revolutionary, and in my eyes, perfect. Honestly, I might even enjoy some of those albums as an experience a little more than I enjoy albums like Ready to Die or All Eyes on Me as much as I enjoy them. Because despite loving those albums and still finding plenty of enjoyment in them to this day, they aren't necessarily my favorite albums ever or my go to albums. The important distinction to make is even if they aren't in my personal top 10 hip hop albums I'd choose to have on a desert island, I still want to acknowledge the impact they had and give them credit for making a lot of my favorite albums that would come down the line even possible. Even if one of the classics I bring up isn't necessarily lorded over the way an album like The Chronic is, that doesn't make it any less important to listen to. The Chronic was an album that actually took me a lot longer to hear than most of these classics. Obviously, I knew the big hits, but the only thing preventing me from really having this album in my rotation when I was younger was it not being on streaming services. I had a similar issue with Jay-Z and De La Soul, where I heard and enjoyed some of their albums on YouTube in high school, but not having the material in my playlists or on my phone in general kept me from being as familiar with them as Wu-Tang or Tribe, whose albums I could listen to on Spotify or Apple Music at any time. I hadn't really started collecting vinyls yet, so I think a good amount of people my age may have had the same experience, where you wouldn't have heard the albums front to back unless you really went out of your way to look for it. Due to this, I had a very skewed version of the beefs going on at the time, because I was much more familiar with the disses coming out of Eazy-E's side of the camp opposed to Dr. Dre and Snoop's. Since it was before my time outside of research, the only way I could really weigh in on that situation is by choosing who had the better disses. Dre and Snoop held no punches on the Chronic and have slick jabs at Easy sprinkled throughout, but the most direct response is definitely Fuck with Dre Day and Everybody's Celebrating. While it definitely deserves a spot in the top 10 or 20 best diss tracks in hip hop, I have to give the nod to Real Motherfucking G's and No Vaseline as the better diss tracks. But keep in mind, those disses are regarded over 99% of diss tracks, so that really isn't much of a slight. However, there is one thing you have to give the Chronic that you can't say about All Eyes on Me, Ready to Die, or even Illmatic. That being the main rapper of the album, encompassing the role of producer as well, which Dre is basically the definition of. He didn't make some of the beats on here, he didn't even make most of the beats, he made all of them void of any co production, at least that's listed. To me, that more than excuses the fact he's had other people write for him, or how he isn't exactly regarded as a top tier lyricist. Dre, to my knowledge, has never gone out of his way to hide his tendency for ghostwriters, and the bars perfectly matching his voice is really what matters. I don't know if you could even technically call it ghostwriting because, again, from what I know, he's been extremely honest and open about who's written for him. Dr. Dre is one of the few artists in hip hop who had game changing, revolutionary projects, all of which feature more than capable delivery and execution, yet he doesn't get mentioned in top rapper lists. I've never heard him complain about this, and I feel like people are normally pretty respectful when leaving him off, being that most of us put him as a default option as one of the four best producers in the genre, the other three most commonly being Jay Dilla, RZA, and DJ Premier. Over the years, he's had numerous legends write for him, some of which include Jay-Z, the DOC, and of course Ice Cube. However, as I mentioned earlier, Dre was beefing with Eazy and Cube at this time, which resulted in Dre recruiting Snoop to do the bulk of the writing on this album. A byproduct of that was Snoop getting multiple features on the album, which jump-started the career of one of the most famous and instantly recognizable figures in hip-hop. However, he's by no means the only feature. There's a heap of MCs from all over that show up to flow over Dr. Dre's smooth or sinister instrumentation, depending on what track they're on. Just some of these include RBX, Jewel, Daz Dillinger, Warren G, Nate Dogg, BJ, The Lady of Rage, Corrupt. We have the DOC again, as well as Bushwick Bill from Ghetto Boys. One reason The Chronic has solidified Dre as such an all-time great in most people's eyes is sonically this album doesn't just sound fresher than most other 92 albums, it's even aged better than a lot of hip-hop albums from 95 to 96. It pretty much single-handedly made G-Funk one of the most popular and profitable styles of the early to mid-90s, though you have to acknowledge guys like DJ Quick, Warren G, Nate Dogg, and the whole Dog Pound. By the end of the 90s, the G-Funk craze was dying down and the sound was following suit. Probably at that point, the last real G-Funk album that had come out was DJ Quick's Rhythmalism, which was kind of a send-off to G-Funk and that whole movement. But then Drake came out with 2001 and proved once again that he wasn't in any danger of falling behind his peers. The Chronic is a lot more than that, though. Instead, he was setting the standard for his peers, and by making all of his own beats, he was able to make every beat sound exactly like it did in his head, which is much harder to do if you're solely an MC and trying to describe your idea to a producer. Well, it's a shame that the various members of NWA weren't really able to reconcile with Eazy prior to his death. It does appear like the breakup and subsequent dissing lit a fire underneath everyone involved, regardless of who may have been at fault. The fact is, we got some of the best diss tracks the genre has to offer, and there's a chance that if the split never happened, we wouldn't have The Chronic, It's On Dr. Dre, 187 Killa, Ice Cube solo albums, or even Doggy Style, at least not in the forms we know and love today. This is also another one of those classic projects that has multiple legendary beats with at least a couple that practically anyone would recognize, even if they don't consciously think they know any Dr. Dre songs. It's hard to imagine anyone hasn't at least heard Nothing But a G Thing, but if that's the only song you know, I would definitely recommend giving the full album a listen because that's easily the most poppy, accessible song. Practically every other track on here still has that G-Funk quality, but the high-pitched synthesizers are used in a much more grimy and dusty way. It's almost like taking some of the rough noises and direct style his earlier work with NWA had and mixing it together with the more silky smooth, driving around LA in a drop top type of music that again someone like DJ Quick was a big pioneer in. By doing this, The Chronic wasn't just sonically impressive to the point it would raise the eyebrows of even the staunchest old school rock engineer, it also remained as popular as possible in the streets, and it could still please the crowd that isn't as interested in vast soundscapes. They may not realize how much engineers play a role in these classics, but that's only because their job is only done well when you aren't noticing anything is wrong. Like with sound editors for movie or TV, if they did their job right, the audience wouldn't have ever thought about the mixing. It's easy to ignore it when it's good, so people act like it's a given, but then something like the Astroworld mishap happens where Travis had Nav on a song and it was mixed so low it was unlistenable. For many of us, that was the first time we even heard mixing brought up in casual music conversation, but it can make a world of difference if it's done badly. I think those types of mistakes can come from the artist rushing and not wanting to take the time to test them properly with different speaker systems. The Chronic didn't come at a time with Pro Tools and laptops either. This was still in a very early stage for hip hop, though it's been remastered like most classics of its age. You could put on the original version in your car, and you may be surprised at just how rich and full the Chronic still sounds over 30 years later. I'm gonna leave out the numerous skits for the sake of space, but they're worth acknowledging because they're hilarious and help break up the pace of the album. For this one, I'm gonna get my honorable mentions out of the way first, since there's a decent amount of them. Those would be The Day the Nice Men Took Over, Nothing But a G Thing, Lil Ghetto Boy, Rat-a-tat-tat, and Lyrical Gangbang. My three main favorites would have to be Fuck with Dre Day, Let Me Ride, and Stranded on Death Row. Thank you for watching my 39th video. I'm trying to divide the list up so I can keep kind of alternating coasts. Because with how prominent New York was in the 80s and 90s, it would have been easy to accidentally do a bunch of New York albums in a row. I'd prefer to get as much of an even spread as I can, so next time we're going to talk about another New York classic, then we'll come back to the West, then the South, and so on and so forth. So be sure to check that out when it drops, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and let me know what your favorite songs off Dre's definitive solo album are. Don't forget to have a great day, and I'll see you next time, okay? Alright.